Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are tonight's entertainment.
Sound good?
Yes, sir! I know who I am!
Did IQs just drop shot while I was away?
I have a plan. I like this shit.
You know, it's exciting.
Dance off, bro.
It is your
Me and you.
destiny.
Welcome to the Atlantic Screen Connection Podcast.
Let the games begin.
Hello and welcome to the Atlantic Screen Connection Podcast with Jason and Lee. I'm Jason.
I'm Lee.
And today we are kicking off Season 3 by talking about Baby Driver, Edgar Wright's most recent film. And we're going to actually talk about a little bit of Spider-Man, I think, too. Might as well get that out of the way because we're not going to be
whatever's going.
Yeah.
Whatever's cool right now. What are the kids talking about? I hear that they like their Spider-Mans.
But before we get into what we want to talk about, I'm going to check in with Lee. How you doing, sir?
I'm great. Season 3 is when was the last time we were recording? Like April or something like that. So what's happened? I've got married. I went to America. And spent a long ass time there, and I took a while out to do some screenwriting, so I got 2 screenplays done, and then I got back into all the film stuff again and started building this whole career deal. Oh yeah, and I'm quitting my job in August. Yeah, there's plenty of things that happened in that small interim. It seems almost like it would, like it didn't seem when I sat down to do it. It felt like, oh, it's only been like a couple of weeks since we did the podcast, and in a couple of weeks I managed to upend my life, so that's pretty good. Definitely. Yeah, I saw the pictures of your wedding. It looked really fun, but I'm pretty sure that fun is one of those masks that you put on when you're getting married, and at the end of it, it's just a fucking relief to not have to go through it anymore. No idea. Just the idea of the wedding itself. It was a really good day, and it was. Yeah, it looked like it. It was definitely genuinely fun. But at the same time, it doesn't compare to the sheer relief, as you're saying, of just it being over. Just financially, knowing that fucking vampire of any change had been slain, and we could go on to, well, okay, granted, we went on to then an expensive honeymoon. But once that was dead, that's when things started to feel a little better. Yeah, in your honeymoon, I saw pictures. That was really cool. We got an unfair amount of views on the video you posted with regards to Wonder Woman. It was the thing I couldn't believe it. Like it had been viewed like 500 and some odd times, and I was like, what? Why is Lee's video getting so many views? That was insane, man. That thing was on a trend for I don't know how long on the AtlanticSC, and I just kept seeing the numbers. I'm not a numbers guy. I don't look at stats all that much, although I do kind of check and see if we're doing any good, Mm-hmm. But I noticed the week after that thing came out, like you could see like everything was in the red. It was down 650%. And fuck, I didn't see any of that shit. I was just like,
but it was funny.
I was in the desert and wanted an excuse to make a video. So I was like, yeah, this is a weird scenario.
Anyway, so no, same thing for me. I mean, I can't believe like summer. I'm already halfway done, and it pisses me off because I can see the new semester creeping up on me, and I'm terrified right now.
We've had so little time to really take it all in. That's
exactly
terrible.
Yeah. My girlfriend Leslie just started work again on Monday, and I'm just kind of like, fuck. She had 2 weeks off, and she's already back to work. And oh my God. But we did have a fun week with my parents. We went over there, and we were able to rest quite a bit. But I mean, it's just so weird because she's coming down from her work week, so she needs that week to really take it easy. Yeah. And then after that, the week we got back to our place, we were useless. Like, we were like, fuck, we got to pick up now. We got to try to do so many different other things. She wanted to, like, get her yarn business up and going, And
oh, my God.
She did manage to dye a little bit of yarn, and
that's
it's just not enough time.
No way, man. Terrible. I mean, there has to be this point where if you want to actually become productive, you have to go through a series of stages, or first you need rest, then you need to get bored. Then you can be active, and you have to... And the bored phase can be as short as a week and as long as a month. And you can't predict it every time. So that's why you just need to set aside like this whole block just to be able to then be creative afterwards.
Yeah.
So 2 weeks is never going to cut it. That's devastating.
Exactly, and I feel exactly like you're telling me, but I go through those stages too. But other than that, I mean, I've been able to watch a bunch of movies. I went to the theater a couple of times. I've been reading, and it's funny. I had talking to you because I just recently bought myself a book on the works of Christopher Nolan. It was a series of critical essays on his films. And I sent you a picture. I was like, check it out. And he was like, oh my God, that looks like a fucking nightmare.
I like essays in like small bursts. And sometimes when I get one, like with today's episode, actually, just a little foreshadowing. When I find a book that really grabs me, I adore it. I can't wait to own it. And like, I'll read it 100 fucking times if it's really good. But it's like once in a blue moon, and it has to grab me conceptually. And when I just look at you sent me a picture of a fucking list of like 7 or 8 Nolan essays, all with long-ass essay titles. And you were like, Fun Friday, or whatever the fuck you were talking about. I was like, man. I kind of threw up in my mouth. Like, oh, Jesus. Just like the stress of it. It was like, oh, it's just like university when I didn't do the reading at that time either. And now it's creeping back into my life. What have I done? Who is this nutcase I started to work with?
I don't know. I find that shit fun, man. When I wake up in the morning, I have this 20-minute window because this is the way that my family works. I wake up first, and then I have to wake everyone up because just that's the way they elected our lives should be.
Right.
And so I put on the alarm, and then Leslie says, "Give me 5 more minutes." But what she's really saying is, wake me up in 20. There's a whole process, and I'm fine with it because I can barely sleep.
Well, you're up anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Exactly, because I'm back from fighting crime, and so I have that 20-minute window where I can sit down, and I love reading those, like a little bit of those essays in the morning.
Right.
And I remember my dad, when I came home with the book, he just flipped it open to see what it was like. He just looked through the titles, and he looked up at me, put the book down, and walked away. It was awesome. It just said everything it needed to say. It was like, yeah, you and your weird shit.
Yeah.
I was like,
someday, I pray you'll take a day off.
You know what? That actually makes more sense. Just like, stop thinking, Jason. This is just too much now. But I mean, look, who's kidding? I'm not a smart guy. It blows because I'm trying to fill my brain with information. But when it comes time to communicate it,
yeah. We put ourselves in the one medium neither of us are prepared for.
There you go. AtlanticSC. The one medium that we're not prepared for. There you go. That's a great tagline we're going to be using from now on. Shall we play the trailer for Spider-Man Homecoming?
Why not?
Cool. So we'll be back after the trailer for Spider-Man Homecoming with a mini review, just a initial reaction, thoughts, or whatever. And then after that, we'll get into Baby Driver. Stay tuned.
Hello, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Bernadette, and we're the AB Film Review. We're a weekly film review and discussion podcast from Perth, Western Australia. We're a married couple who like to spend our Saturday evenings avoiding reality by discussing and often arguing about the latest films and some classics.
And getting closer to divorce. You can find us on the Podbros network at podbros.com, also on Twitter at AB Film Review, Facebook AB Film Review, and our website abfilmreview.com.
Underoos!
Hey everyone. I get to keep the suit?
Of course. Doesn't fit me. Just don't do anything I would do. And definitely don't do anything I wouldn't do. There's a little gray area in there, and that's where you operate.
What's up, guys? Wait a minute. You want the real Avengers?
But this does not mean you're an Avenger, in case you were wondering.
Oh.
That's not a hug. I'm just grabbing the door for you. Oh, all right, kid. Good luck out there.
The world's changing, boys. Time we change, too.
Listen, Peter, forget the flying monster guy. There are people who handle this sort of thing.
I'm sick of him treating me like a kid.
But you are a kid.
This is my chance to prove myself.
Don't mess with me. Because I will kill you and everybody you love.
hope that you guys enjoyed the trailer for Spider-Man Homecoming, a film that stars Tom Holland, Robert Downey Jr., Michael Keaton, fabulous Michael Keaton, Marissa Tomei, and the kid that was in Grand Budapest Hotel. Forgot his name.
Really? He was Flash. I knew his face, and I didn't even fucking didn't register at the time. Of course, I don't know his name.
All right, so initial reaction, first thoughts, dear sir.
I really enjoyed this film. I'm a long time. I would say Spider-Man's my favorite superhero, so I always have to sort of do a bias check when it comes to Spider-Man, because even the Amazing Spider-Man films, these corporate monster machine movies written by like a committee, I enjoyed on a first watch because I was just happy to see Spider-Man on screen, because I just always like him, even when he was played by a 30-year-old.
Yeah.
But I like Spider-Man movies, but I've never loved any one Spider-Man movie. I've always preferred the cartoon version, really, more than any of the others. And I think this is the first film that really did its best to get as close to what I imagined Spider-Man to be, which is this sort of perpetual idealistic teenager character who deals with large versions of very small problems that we all kind of go through in our lives, just on a grander, more visual scale. And to me, that was always what was interesting about Spider-Man, because his routine villains, they're always just nobodies. They're a bunch of dudes. One's a doctor, a couple of them are doctors, some teachers of his own, and others, they're just street thugs, guys who fall in bad times, or generally just well-meaning people who kind of end up on the wrong side of the tracks. And Spider-Man is just a well-meaning idiot kid who tries to solve all his problems by punching them. And about 50% of the time it works, and 50% of the times he has to learn something more than punching to figure it all out. And this film was a great example of how to nail the core Spider-Man premise. It was just a kid who had a lot of problems, mostly internalized, and trying to deal with the fact that he thinks he's the greatest shit that's ever happened to the world. And and then it's a movie about teaching that kid who thinks he's the greatest shit that's ever happened to the world to get off his own dick and really learn something from other people. The villain this time is just like he's one of the most totally sympathetic villains of all time. He's just caught in the wrong side of the tracks, and Michael Keaton did him huge service because he was amazing to watch. And I just generally, the smallness of the story was what I really liked, and it was only when it occasionally became too big and too distracted.
Yeah,
that's when I started to distance myself from it. When you're piloting a invisible jet away from a city, that's too big for Spider-Man. Why the fuck's he anywhere near a jet that could kill people?
That's Sony.
Yeah, exactly. And
That's not Marvel.
It's a cool set piece, and it had great. I mean, when it goes like disco colors in the sky, it's great to watch. But it's nothing to do with what I'm supposed to be there for. It's too big, heisty movie kind of stuff. And like the MCU stuff, I like the relationship between Iron Man and Spider-Man, but a lot of the Avengers, and while it was a good framework for his character, a lot of the Avengers mythos that plays into the story, he shouldn't be near that. It's too big. It's way too big, this whole an alien invasion nonsense. What we needed more was him in school and doing school things, and we do get a fair amount of that, and it is fun to watch when he's there, but there's just, I think a smarter decision towards the end of the movie would have been more school, more shunning the airplane, because it really does represent a total different film, and it kind of falters for me near the end, how he ends up basically into a big set-piece battle instead of the battle being brought to him.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the film. It's not a flawless movie, but for a blockbuster, it has a lot going for it. And for a Spider-Man film, it's as close to a Spider-Man story we've yet seen. And I'm happy to see it. It's just a good time.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was a very fun movie. I really had a lot of fun watching the film. I felt throughout the entire movie, though, that it was very uneven as a picture.
Yeah.
And you could tell who was pulling the strings when, Yeah, it was funny. I like the how small, like you pointed it out, it's a very small story with big things happening in it. And I couldn't help but think of Star Trek Beyond, where, you know, you have this very small story in a giant fucking movie. And I really appreciated, you know, how, like you mentioned, the high school stuff, the things in school were the things that I thought hit home more than the action sequences. I felt that there were things that were inconsistent, that didn't work for me anyway. The thugs walking in the hallways with guns, like in a school, I was like, okay,
that was weird. They quickly brushed that away, but that was very odd.
It was weird, and plus, there's no lighting. I mean, what time of day are they there? Is this at nighttime? I thought I saw students around. You know,
they're in the other classroom. Maybe it's just after school. Still very weird.
It's very odd. I also listen. Tom Holland is probably the best actor to portray Spider-Man so far. I never was a fan, even when I was watching the Tobey Maguire films. And I mean, we're not trying to compare or anything like that. Even when I was watching the Tobey Maguire films, I never thought of Tobey Maguire as a good actor anyway. And I mean, you could even see it. I remember when, I think it was Steven Soderbergh put out, this was Maguire's first film, I think, post Spider-Man, was The Good German with Cate Blanchett and George Clooney. And it's so weird because the opening of the scene is Tobey Maguire having sex with Cate Blanchett, and he's doing it doggy style, and he's got this grunt on his face, and I was like, "Fuck you! There's no way. That's not happening." You know, you were not believable really as Peter Parker anyway, and now you're doing this it felt like, you know, Pierce Brosnan trying to go complete other way of James Bond when he put out the Matador, and you were like, really, you're going to just go gruffy? I'm not this proper English guy, sorry, Pierce, I know you're Irish, but I just figured, I didn't particularly like, I like the Spider-Man sequences, you know, in Spider-Man 2, I appreciated it a little bit more because kind of like in Homecoming, you know, you have these more tragic villains where you kind of understand where they're coming from. It goes a little bit beyond, you know, just them being completely possessed or mad or something like that. Yeah. There is some sort of ambition there. You know, when you look at Doc Ock, I mean, that was his entire life where you're like, he put all this time and effort into making something. He went a little mad. Yes, he lost his wife. You can feel that there's a very tragic figure underneath that. And so his being a villain is more of a byproduct of a series of unfortunate events.
Yeah, definitely.
And I feel like the Michael Keaton Vulture, Adrian Toomes character is somewhat like that in Homecoming as well, where you're like, this is a dude that's trying to provide for his family. Now, granted, he didn't have to go all out and live the hardcore American dream with the windowed house and the cars. And he could have taken it down a notch.
Yeah. But I guess when you get fucked that hard and you're on you know, you kind of end up begging them, and then they just let you fucking fuck off, which is probably something in a less dramatic way that happens to people all the time, especially
absolutely.
and the rich people and so on that have these initiatives, and they don't actually think about the poor people who get affected by these things. You could understand, and I could understand a real person even doing it, where they just go, I'm going to take as much as I can get because, you know, I was doing the right thing and they fucked me over, and, you know, they totally deserve as much as they get. I agree, though. It is like the most, like, how do you not find this criminal who was, you know, a construction worker or something, you know, like, you know, in like he went from 8 years to like one of the richest men in his suburb, you know, like, something's going on, like, you know, no real trace of what job he does, like, the IRS is going to find you, sir.
Exactly. What's going to happen with that audit?
Exactly.
But, one thing that I really did like was the earlier action sequences. I thought there were a couple, like the Ferris Bueller reference was a little on the nose.
Little.
You know, a lot of people
literally
saying
has it playing at the same time.
Well, there's that, you know. But I like the whole John Hughes aspect that people keep mentioning is there in spirit, but is so not there in terms of how the film is made. And so just because it's a high school film doesn't necessarily mean that we have to constantly be quoting John Hughes.
He is
as
our
the source.
proto high school guy. We're still trying to get a bigger name in high school movies. I think that's why he's the go-to. But there are more, but I mean, it's way closer to something like I guess, you know, like Fault in Our Stars kind of territory.
There you go. That makes a lot more sense to me.
Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl kind of general, like this high school experience, far more rooted in today, far less about the privileged elite having problems, you know, like...
Yeah, and also, I mean, just recently, the Edge of 17. I mean, we have those anxieties that are there, like what we're going to be talking about in terms of Baby Driver a little bit later when we talk about the millennial generation and even Generation Z. I mean, this is very much in line with how they work, And
absolutely.
I thought that Peter was a very charming character. I thought he was just whiny enough to be in the position that he was, where he was like, I just want so much, just let me prove myself.
Just on the edge of unlikable. It's great.
I love the fact that this one wasn't about the fucking girl. It wasn't about a damsel in distress.
Yeah.
It wasn't about, the both iterations that we've seen so far of Spider-Man always involve, you have MJ in the first films, and then you'll have Gwen Stacy in the other ones, where you're like, Peter was never really about that. He happened to get into a relationship with Mary Jane just out of the blue. It just happened. He didn't really work for it. She came on to him most of the time, right?
Yeah,
he wasn't necessarily a stalker or anything like that, like he is in the previous films. And I thought that at least this time it felt, contrary to Logan, I felt that this was really a story about Spider-Man. It was really a story about Peter Parker and how he's learning to deal with who he is. He's looking for an identity. And I don't think that the other films were as good at portraying that. He did have a little bit of trouble, but at the same time, we never saw him in crisis. His crisis was like, should I be Spider-Man? Because I'm going to be hurting the people I love. I'll be putting them in danger. We didn't get any of that at all in this one. And I remember when we were talking during even our Captain America Civil War episode that I was starting to get superhero fatigue. And I read online, I remember, I think it was Matt Zoller Seitz, film critic, who said that this year's superhero films have turned a new page. We're a new leaf. Right. And we're on to something very different now. And I have to be honest, I agree. I agree that Logan was an interesting step in a direction that could be cool, but all because of Deadpool. However, Wonder Woman and Spider-Man are setting the bar in a very different place. And I'm eager to see what the hell comes after.
I would loop Guardians Volume 2 in there as well.
Oh, sorry, Guardians also. That's the other one I was looking for.
Yeah,
Guardians of the Galaxy also. I loved Guardians of the Galaxy. I loved Wonder Woman. And I really, really enjoyed Spider-Man Homecoming. Logan, not as much. We talked about it, but I'll leave it at that. But from what I've seen so far, this seems to be on a path that I kind of want to follow.
This year has been stellar so far. I mean, when you look at the one you didn't like the most, and it's Logan, and you go like, but Logan's still a really good film, though.
It's still a very good movie.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not one of my favorites. It's just a pretty good movie. It doesn't really matter what else comes. I watch Justice League and Thor Ragnarok. They don't have to be good anymore. Because we've been spoiled in regards to this, and so now we can take the year off, let what happens happen, and be ultimately disappointed when we fall back into this with, I don't know, I think, what was it? David Shabat said Ant-Man and the Wasp. That sounds like a good starting point.
Back to Spider-Man Homecoming. Do I recommend it? Yes, 100%. I think it's a wonderful film. I think kids are going to love this. This one, they're going to gobble this one up. I can't wait to see if it ages properly. The CGI in it looks really awesome, but at the same time, there's a lot of stuff in there that I was like,
I don't know. It doesn't bother me looking forward. But yeah, I'm on the same ship. Not the ferry, just a general good meeting ship that doesn't get torn apart. I totally recommend Spider-Man Homecoming. It's just a damn good blockbuster and also a damn good Spider-Man film. And what more could you really want?
Yeah, exactly.
If you want more, you're bound to get disappointed, which would explain a lot about current reactions.
Yeah. All right, so that's it for us on Spider-Man Homecoming. So stay tuned. We're going to play the trailer for Baby Driver, and we'll be back with our takes on the film. Stay tuned.
Gentlemen, welcome to Pop Culture Case Study.
Hi, I'm David Hart, host of Pop Culture Case Study, a podcast that analyzes film from a psychological angle. On Thursdays, we take a look at an older movie, pick a theme, and then apply the research that has been in the psychological field to it. Then on Monday, we tie all of that to a new release. And lastly, there's a section of the show called Fangirl Fixation, dedicated to my wife Britt's ongoing film education. We discuss older films that she's recently seen, as well as the upcoming releases for that week. You can find Pop Culture Case Study on your podcast player of choice, and I will be there, as always, diagnosing your favorites and judging you for what you watch.
There he is.
Hey, baby.
Why is he listening to music all the time?
He had an accident when he was a kid. He still got a hum in the drum. Plays music to drown it out.
That's what makes him the best.
Aren't you mysterious?
Maybe.
This business is a world consistent of three things: money, sex, and action. One of these days, you're gonna get blood on your hands.
Wait. I gotta start the song over.
Hey, Sheila.
Okay, go.
Baby, you tell me who dies.
No, I'm driving. It's all the music you need, folks.
So welcome back. Hope you guys enjoyed the trailer for Baby Driver, a film that was directed by Edgar Wright and stars Ansel Elgort, Kevin Spacey, Lily James, John Barenthal, Jamie Foxx, John Hamm, and Isa Gonzalez. Lee, what did you think of Baby Driver?
Best film ever made. Yeah, we're that kind of show now. We're reactionary.
Yeah, exactly. It's the best thing.
Yeah.
This is our Uche episode.
Anyone who says otherwise is wrong.
Okay.
Edgar Wright has only made perfect films, and he continues this trend with the latest perfect film.
In all seriousness, what the fuck did you think of the movie?
I really liked Baby Driver. I would say, give it time. Could be a sort of a love-ish scenario, but at present, I'd say that it's one of those, man, I'm going to look back on 2017 and think, what a lovely little haze this period of my life was when I seen Baby Driver, was buzzed coming out of it, and spent the next 2 weeks reading up as much crap as I wanted to, and thinking about it over and over again, and having images and the soundtrack play over in my head. It's that kind of film, a film that kind of very much defines a little tiny period of a person's life, and I'm very happy about that. It's by no means perfect. By the factor of it being a genre film, it is also by no means everyone's film. It's not for everybody, but it is very interesting and very good at what it tries to do, some of which I know the both of us will try to unpack here. And I think probably for more technical and filmmaking reasons, critical reasons than I think genuine blockbuster reasons, but the two aren't mutually exclusive. They definitely reinforce each other in a lot of ways, and constantly when you go back to the film, I find new things to think about how it reinterprets the media over and over again, and that's the kind of shit I like. Even in your straightforward action film, you can look at it from any other aspect and go, well, that's totally different, and it still holds up. And that might be a factor of its simplicity. It might be a factor of the filmmaking that went into it, the general nature of its screenwriting. But there's a lot of ways that you kind of... It was basically having to pick which one I wanted to talk about today. That was my only burden, really. It could have been a pile of different topics we would have went down. But it was kind of just trying to narrow the field and think of something that I wanted, that screamed out to me at the moment. And then, absolutely, when I get to see it a second time, a third time, when I get to watch it in my, relaxing in my living room, and having it on the TV and just getting to pick it apart a little more.
Right.
Edgar Wright's going to put in there. That's going to be a very exciting time to just chill out and enjoy a film that I already enjoy, but enjoy it more for the effort that you can't get on a first-time experience. It definitely has flaws. And I think that probably depends on which way you're reading it that day. There's not every reading holds up 100% without a little question mark over some elements. But again, that could be a factor of its simplicity. To me, there's definitely some readings I go like, yeah, but, and that but is always a little bit of a detractor. But for the most part, the fact that you can get as much out of such a simple story is just a great sign of the amount of effort and dedication somebody went to telling a damn original and interesting concept in a fun and entertaining way. And right from the bat, I'll just get out that I absolutely recommend the film, even for if you don't think you'll like it. Just find out by actually watching it. You don't have to, but you might more than like it. Put it that way.
Cool. I agree. I think this is I'm going to call it a bookmark film. It's one of those films that you can revisit time and time again because it's going to be one of those films that you can go back to as a reference point for something. So, I mean, just like for me, like Drive and Take Shelter that came out in 2011, those are bookmark films for me because I'm like, okay, these are exemplary of the time that they came out, things that were going on in culture at that moment in time, but also who the people that were actually making the films, this is where they were in their careers. And I think that this is going to be Edgar Wright's bookmark film. The one where he actually goes, there's going to be before Baby Driver and there's going to be after Baby Driver.
Absolutely.
And this one in Baby Driver, this is a cocksure Wright with a vengeance. This is him saying that to me, the whole film plays out as a, I won't say it's a fuck you to Marvel.
No.
But it's like,
because there are elements of Marvel in there, definitely. So.
Exactly. But it's him showing them, like, had you let me express myself, the vision that I had for Ant-Man, you could have benefited from all this.
Yeah, exactly.
As well, so it was him basically on overdrive the entire time, the whole shifting in the car is him basically going, fuck this, I'm going this way. Yeah. And you can feel it. You can feel it on screen that, Baby's driving is the same as Edgar's directing in this one, where he's just full throttle, going for it all out. He has the entire soundtrack playing. He knows exactly what he's doing. All the moves are there. Everything is calculated. And it felt a little bit weird to be comparing it to Guy Ritchie's Snatch style, where you can see that, or even Sherlock Holmes is a better example, where he can predict every single move of every character before he actually goes into a fight. I feel like Edgar Wright you can see every one of his moves there, and he's calling attention to his direction throughout the entire film, and I love that sometimes.
In the right context, absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, as a film, to me, it was as immersive for the viewer as it is an exercise in detachment, where you're constantly aware that you're watching a movie. Most times films are not going to want to be like a theater experience, like a play where you're like, okay, I'm watching people perform. They want to stay close to reality. Look at Christopher Nolan. He's been doing his best to make the superhero genre something that's relatable and something that's real. In Baby Driver, this isn't real world. And I love the fact that this is another contained story in the career of Edgar Wright, the same way as like you'll have Kevin Smith's Clerks that are in the whole Jersey Chronicles, and then you'll have Tarantino, who all of his characters inhabit this world. Now Wright is basically done with his Cornetto trilogy. Everybody that had to do with Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, The Shaun of the Dead, World's End, Hot Fuzz, and all that is done. Now he's going to be rebuilding the world according to how he sees what he's doing with Baby Driver. I could be wrong, but I think that this is a step in a direction I want to see now. This is really, really interesting. I thought it was cool. I went with my parents, I went with my girlfriend as well, who they enjoyed the film, possibly not as much as I did. I liked it, flaws and all. It's one of those things that I feel like it's a person that I've met before. I know the ins and outs of that person, but even if I am acquainted with the person, he will always surprise me with something new. And I feel like this is one relationship that I'm happy to rekindle, because Edgar Wright, I like Edgar Wright, but I mean, I don't revisit his films as often as I should. But at the same time, even when I do revisit the films, I find myself getting bored sometimes because I can see them coming along. I'm like, okay, I can see the punchline. I know where the joke is. They're not films that I can rewatch.
The punchline, that's a clear note, because that formula, I think you're going to see how it works best in scenarios like Baby Driver,
right?
Because it's not a comedy. Something that is rewatchable and meant for rewatch doesn't really work when you have to listen to jokes again, because you're only going to laugh the once.
No, exactly.
This is that step into taking your work a little more seriously. Not that you can't write comedy seriously.
No, exactly.
It absolutely, I think a clear distinction for me immediately was how this just worked better with his style, because I could imagine myself watching it again for enjoyment and spectacle more than having to laugh at it which then becomes something of a pressure under rewatch, because you feel like you have to keep laughing, and you're not going to, because your brain knows the joke. And your brain doesn't laugh at things constantly unless you are the easiest person to market movies to in the world, in which case, lucky you.
But I mean, to me, it's the Guillermo del Toro came on Twitter, and he basically went on a 13-tweet praise of Baby Driver, and it was beautiful to see that much appreciation from a fellow filmmaker who's like, this is great. This is a fabulous testament to filmmaking. And I think that that's the big difference between the films that Edgar Wright was making before as opposed to the one that he made with Baby Driver. I know that I'd have to go back and watch Scott Pilgrim. It is definitely a cult favorite. It's not one that I enjoyed as much on an initial viewing. I've seen it twice. The second time I watched it, I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. I kind of get where it's coming from.
I will say of Scott Pilgrim, it is the zeitgeist of a very particular generation.
Yeah.
And that's why it's
one I'm not
so
part of,
hit
though.
and
That's
miss.
the thing.
You know, exactly. But to me, that's still my favorite because it speaks so much about a lot of who I am. And a lot about the people I know and our friendships and the things we grew up on. It nails it in such a way that you're never going to see again, basically, for my generation.
Right. Okay.
And on top of that, it is funny, but you'll note that when you watch it again, very much like Baby Driver, it is a genuinely straightforward drama that just happens to be funny more than a straight-up comedy that has dramatic elements worked in.
Yeah, but whereas for me, the way that I was heading toward the fact that I brought up Guillermo del Toro is the fact that Baby Driver to me is if I can use this as a loose comparison, Edgar Wright's Pan's Labyrinth. You know, if you look at it, you look at del Toro's career, when you see everything that he likes, del Toro as an individual, as a director, like everything that has to do with fairy tales, the culmination of everything that man knows and loves is poured into Pan's Labyrinth, and it is a wonderful testament to who he is as a creative genius, in my opinion, and who he is. And he's really telling you, this is who I am. And I feel like Baby Driver is Edgar Wright's version of that Pan's Labyrinth. This is who I am. This is what I'm capable of. And this is him basically pouring out into the world, embrace what I embrace. You know, this is what I like. And I feel that the fact that del Toro came out on that 13-tweet praise was basically saying, I finally have someone who understands me. And it was really cool to see that, you know, these two wonderful creators come together. You know, it's like, I like your movie. I like your movie too.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so cool. We both like each other's movies. And it was a really fun experience to see that, you know, live. You know, we're not privy to those types of things normally.
Definitely.
So I have a feeling like I can't see Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz or At World's End in the Criterion Collection, but Baby Driver, I'm pretty sure we'll get a really interesting bunch of documentaries that are going to come with that. I'm hoping that Baby Driver gets a Criterion release, because this is a fantastic film. This is a wonderful film that you can pick apart. You can go back. There are levels and nuances throughout the entire picture that if you go back on repeated viewings, you're only going to get more from it, regardless of it if it has flaws. The flaws only make it beautiful, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the levels at which you can really play to it. I mean, there's the fairy tale aspect that we were talking about a little bit earlier. You know, to me, this would be post fairy tale. You know, what happens after the happily ever after ending that I talked about with Drive as well. You know, it would be a coming-of-age story in reverse. You know, you'll have the prince, basically, who's very aware of what he's doing. He just hasn't found his princess yet. He doesn't necessarily have to fight any demons or anything like that, but at the same time, he wants to reclaim some sort of innocence, which means he's going to be going from a very much experienced life into a life of innocence, which we'll see at the end of the film. I mean, what color is he wearing? What color does Edgar Wright use when he's walking out of the jail? I mean, you'll have him basically in white. He goes to jail to find his innocence, which is absolutely amazing. That reversal, that subversion is cool. And, you know, if it's in black and white, that means that's his entire canvas. He gets to paint the colors he wants to paint on it now, right? And so I thought that was brilliant. It was also a superhero film as well, in my opinion. You know, using the music as a superpower, the earbuds and sunglasses as armor, in a sense. Obviously, the car is another like another power of his. You know?
His powers, his alter ego, and that he isn't actually called Baby. I can't remember his actual name.
Miles.
Miles, yes. Oh, that's funny.
It's funny, yeah. Miles to go. He still has miles to go.
It reminds me of Tails from Sonic the Hedgehog, who's called Miles Prower.
Oh wow, I have no idea.
And you know what? Because of Wright's exposure to video games with Scott Pilgrim, this just kind of makes me think it's probably a knowing nod to Tales.
Yeah, and I mean, look at the nods to the stoic driver genre. I mean, a car chase, you'll have like Getaway, you'll have Gone in 60 Seconds, Vanishing Point, even Refn's Drive, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
the guy like a few words, and it's kind of funny for him to be living with a mute. He doesn't talk much. He has to use his hands to communicate, and so it's really, really impressive. It's also a musical in disguise, which I thought was brilliant.
Absolutely.
In my mini review that I was talking about, I mentioned a lot of the shots are designed around how vinyls are actually operating, how they turn on a turntable.
Yes.
And it's brilliant. And even the second scene in the film, I noticed that the lyrics were painted on the posts. And he was actually going through this entire choreography, and I was like, Jesus Christ! If only La La Land had this much charm, it would have been a better movie. And I thought that this was a very charming way of setting up a musical, and not necessarily lifting, borrowing, or anything like that. It was just flat out, let's try to reinterpret the genre, and make it that way.
Yeah, without drawing too much attention to itself. That's the important thing. It didn't market itself as a musical, and it has the makings of a classic musical for a 21st century audience, which is fantastic.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's a clear divide as to what reality consists of when the characters start singing on screen whenever you're watching a musical. But I mean, Baby actually brings you into that world. He's lip syncing. Mm-hmm. So he is clearly singing on screen. The only thing is that we're privy to the band he's actually listening to. So that's another way of getting the audience in, because Christ, if that's not relatable, I mean, it's so funny because I remember there was one of my friends, and I'm sorry, Louise, I'm naming you. She was talking to me the other day, and she was at a red light. Her window was down, and she's my age, and so she was listening to System of a Down. That's one of the bands that I grew up with.
Right. Yeah.
And she was listening to the Chop Suey, and here she was just blaring the music
screaming
and singing along. Without realizing that her windows were down and she's at a red light, and there's this dude in the other car next to her just kind of staring at her out the window, until she realizes, fuck, my window's down and this dude can hear me just yelling. And so I just laughed. And so whenever I see that when I saw that scene in Baby Driver, I was like, haha, he's doing a Louise. And so at the same time, I mean, it is a riff on the musical, right?
Yeah, and also, I mean, at the same time, it's also like something of like the quintessential end game for the MTV generation music video. If you want to take that to its logical conclusion as a feature, you kind of see the little components of each 5-minute song being an individual scene or segment in their own, and you put those together, it makes a musical of the MTV mindset and generation, which would be far closer to Wright's, period of time, but absolutely.
Exactly. Music videos. It's exactly what it is. It's a series of music videos throughout the entire film, which is why sometimes it can feel a little bit uneven, because the second act, it does get bogged down a little bit. It gets a little slow in the second act because now we have to, there's a bit of exposition we have to get through, and it's not just car chases and fun times with music.
Can't tell a story
of
all car chases and expect people to pay attention for a full hour and a half.
Yeah, exactly. Just tires screeching. And I mean, just coming back, like I was talking about in terms of the fairy tale, look at the fairy tales that we grew up with Disney. They're all musicals. Cinderella, there's singing involved. Snow White, there's singing. Even The Little Mermaid recently, Aladdin, everything that has to do with that. And they just brought it back again with
your idea of
Rapunzel.
Disney is adorable.
Hold on. Rapunzel as well, Tangled. They'll have that. What was the other one? Was there any singing in Zootopia?
That one from yesteryear, The Lion King.
Oh, shut the fuck up. Come on, man. I mean, and even like we were talking about in terms of fairy tales, everything is there for the hero's journey. Like if you go in reverse as well, you'll have the guardian angel and the black man that he lives with, that he's taking care of in the apartment. Even Doc happens to be the mentor as well. We can see him as a villain. I don't necessarily see him as a villain. I see him as a guy that just
he's a villain with a redemption arc. So I mean, he's just an anti-hero.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah, I think that, and he shepherds over the whole organization, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, I'm going to get into a little bit of what I wanted to take away from it, and I'm going to be harping again on trauma and guilt, because that's what my life is filled with. No, I'm doing okay, people. But that's it. I want to throw myself a curveball and stay away from the fairy tale genre. So basically what I wanted to get into is how, to me, Baby Driver is a film that's somewhat about trauma and guilt. As terrible as that sounds, I believe that under all that is a message of hope for a better future. Sure. But to access that future, you have to shed that guilt. You have to shed that trauma that isn't yours. Now, I came to that idea because, to me, Baby is clearly a millennial and perhaps even closer to the Generation Z. You have the earbuds, the clothes, the way he walks, how he deals with things on his own terms when he can. Mm-hmm. And if we look at what the millennial generation has had to put up with, it's pretty fascinating. They've had to deal with a lot of stuff that wasn't necessarily theirs to deal with, in my opinion. Yeah. And if you look at it, they were really gifted a legacy of shit post 9/11. And they've had to creep out of their parents' trauma and come back to the world as this newborn, but on their own terms. And so there's a clear before and after 9/11, and the same thing where we're talking about the clear before and after Edgar Wright in his films, where there was an innocence lost after 9/11, but not the one that the millennials have. I mean, their parents suffered that loss of innocence and have been affected since that point in time. And that loss of innocence to me is a symbolic death of youth, coming crashing down into this world of experience, one that most parents try to hide from their children. And to me, that's where we find Baby. Baby has lived a traumatic event, witnessing the death of his parents in a violent car crash. And he's been physically affected by it in the form of tinnitus, that ringing in the ears that the audience hears throughout the entire film. And I mean, in a post 9/11 world, there have been many films where you have that male, you have these guys that they don't have defects, they'll have impairments. If you look at the films of Christopher Nolan, just look at Dominic Cobb, who basically has had a traumatic experience and he has to live through something different in Inception, right? He buries it deep, 13 levels I think they have to go to find what his raw unconscious is, and it's actually the death of his wife. And if you look at also Batman, bringing it back to the real world as well, you'll have these traumatic events. And look at all the superhero movies that we have. There is something traumatic that happens to them that leads to their transformation. And I think Baby is actually going through that. The birth of him as the baby that we know is actually going through that traumatic event. Now, to me, that car crash is symbolically representative of the attack that happened on 9/11. And I'm not trying to diminish the impact, but rather try to see it through a millennial's perspective. I teach this generation of kids, maybe a little bit younger, Generation Z. I teach these guys. And Baby Driver gave me an appreciation for how their thought process is. It actually helped me as a teacher understand a little bit more of what they are going through, how they see the world. Mm-hmm. And they were too young to process the information of 9/11, the fact that the world had changed, especially for the U.S. Now, if they're trying to make sense of what happened at such a young age, isn't that perhaps just a little too much to ask, Yeah, absolutely. And as they get older and their pop culture is more and more infused with elements of that traumatic event, wouldn't it be understandable that at one point they try to block it out, avoid the white noise that is constantly trying to make them feel something that isn't theirs to feel? I say that either isn't something they want to deal with at that moment in time, or more importantly, maybe something that isn't theirs to deal with in the first place.
Yeah, right.
So that white noise that I mentioned to me is that tinnitus that Baby suffers from. And the soundtracks he plays as a means to escape that white noise. When he meets Deborah, she becomes that hope I was mentioning earlier, a means for him to wipe the slate clean and start over, living according to his rules and not be governed by a trauma from the past. And I think that is kind of a fun way to see Baby Driver in a very weird way, obviously, because it is kind of our responsibility to help our kids negotiate whatever they have to go through in life. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind that we can't necessarily constantly be trying to heap how we felt about situations onto them. And I think that Baby, at the beginning of the film, him having that much experience already is him having to deal with so much shit that had happened before that he never really had a youth. He never really had the chance to be a child. And so it's ironic that his name is Baby in this case, right? He has to go from being a baby to Miles, but at the same time, there's a reversal in that case because at the end of the film, he's washed clean of whatever he had done. He wasn't supposed to see the world of crime he was in. Yes, he owed a debt to Doc, but that's not his to pay. He shouldn't have had to pay for that. Pay for what adult did or what happened to this adult, you know? And so we could speculate that the reason Baby got so good at driving is because he never wanted to die in a car crash like his parents did, right? I remember my parents telling me that they tried to avoid repeating the same mistakes their parents made when they were raising me, and I'd be lying if I said that I'm not doing the same thing with my kids. Right?
Of course, it's
I have to keep protecting them.
Yeah, it's exactly. You know, there's always something that slips the net, but you do have to keep trying to learn from what you know.
Exactly. And I mean, even if I've lived through 9/11, you know, my kids are only going to hear about it in a history book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, my daughter was born in 2005 and my second daughter was born in 2007. This is not something they've lived through. It's obviously something that I can't take onto myself because I wasn't in New York when this I wasn't in New York, but it is a very clear defining moment in my life where I can talk about it. But I remember mentioning it to the kids I'm teaching and they were like, we were 2. We have no idea what you're talking about. And so I feel like a little bit of the culture, you know, it's kind of fun that I like it when British guys are making American films. Because I saw the same thing with Hell or High Water, you know, and Mackenzie's directing where you're like, wow, he seems to know a lot more about what the U.S. is going through than a lot of U.S. filmmakers are. And the same thing for Edgar Wright. He made the film in Atlanta. And so you're like, he can see, he has this outside perspective on how things are going. And maybe I could be reaching with my interpretation of the film. And this is only one aspect that I decided to pick apart because it's one that I didn't see anybody talking about. And this is the way I see it. But, you know, I feel like that's how I see one aspect of it, you know, and it's taking the joy out of Baby Driver, obviously.
No, but it's exactly what I was saying, that the film is that general. It speaks to a lot of the time it was made in, just like you were saying, it's a bookmark film. This makes a lot of sense as the path to go down when you're looking at it. Just the immediate, what exactly is happening right now at the moment, with 2017 being the year of inherited problems, especially for the US.
Perfect way to put it. It is an inherited problem.
I think that the film is open enough that once we get 5-10 years later down the line, it's going to be speaking about a number of other things that you hadn't really, you won't have seen when you were there at the moment. But I think that this is something that I like. I was watching. They're soon closing down, which is a real shame because I only found out about them. Is this PBS Idea channel? They made a video recently about millennials, and it was the question that they posed to contemplate over was, how are millennials not to blame for everything, as in to sort of subvert the question that keeps appearing on every news source. What the episode goes into talking about is appropriated memories, which is exactly what you're talking about. The this idea that,
to be fair, I want to point out that my idea. Yes, please.
I was just going to say,
I had this idea before, and then you said to me, "Hey, you should check this out." But I had already made up my mind.
No, absolutely. So. It's just like it was actually just the same. The day before you came to me with what you were planning to talk about was the day after I had seen the video, when I was like, wow, that is a great coincidence that that's on my mind right now. But yeah, no, what you're saying, cool. But it's clearly on everyone's mind because there's a lot of shit going around in 2017 that older generations are really very much forcing on the younger generations who have no idea what it's about. Even currently in the UK, the idea of Brexit, which we're going through at the moment, it was very much pushed on us by a larger, older voting demographic who have chosen to leave the European Union because of reasons that are very particular to the older generation. Just I imagine in relation to how they feel about Europe as a general growing disdain. There's a lot of particular things to that generation, to the older generations, that they just have never truly trusted this thing, but they seem to also have forgotten that it was a British decision to A, start it off, and B, define it the way it's been defined. So there's a lot of misinterpretation of what's going on exactly at the moment. But the fact is that by leaving this, most people will generally agree that it's going to be a hard time for the succeeding generation rather than the older generation, who will die just as the going is just as the going gets bad. Whereas the younger generation will have to try and pick up the pieces and figure out what exactly post-Brexit UK looks like, because nobody knows. And that's it's kind of the way that's happening with the Trump America at the same time. It's all speaking to a very
it's a bit weird, man.
similar thing going on, and that and a lot of people are now questioning the generational system as to try to get some answers as to why these people have ended up thinking the way they think of, and why there's now a far further right and conservative feel to understanding society than there probably has been for a very long time. And a lot of that, I think, is what you're picking up on from Baby Driver, this story of a young kid with the world crashing down around him, just trying to get by and try to piece himself together. Before he even thinks about doing the right thing, he's only trying to do the right things in the bits and pieces he can control. Like, he gives the purse back, and he tells the woman to get clear of the danger. These are the moments that are defined within that character's ability to define them, but everything else is totally outside his control other than trying to keep on going. And this feels exactly like it would to the coming generations who are now looking at this burgeoning pressure to fix the world, and who put that upon them. They haven't even figured out what's wrong with them, because they're the problem apparently at the moment. The millennials, they are to blame for everything.
Yeah.
So apparently they have to get over themselves first before they even go into that, and that's what I think would be interesting to see with Wright in the future. If this is the pre-Brexit, pre-Trump film that's leading up to where that election takes place, or where the referendum that happened in the UK, but what we see just after it is the sort of reclamation in Baby Driver of the millennial who has started to gather a little bit of themselves, but we don't see much of the recourse. We don't see much of the decisions. And I think what would be a great companion to this film in the future is if we do see, not with Baby Driver, I would say that I never want to see a sequel to Baby Driver.
No, fuck no. They're talking about it, and that's a terrible idea.
But what I mean is I want Wright to continue on that train of thought. I want him to... I think that examining what a generation, if such a thing exists, socially as a construct, it definitely might exist. But if it does exist, I would like to see somebody take that fully and explore possible scenarios in which they reclaim and what will challenge them in the future. And I think that Baby Driver, the way you read it, is a great way to read it, because it is definitely there to me. I see it makes sense, the progress of the story, how that works out. And that's why I would just love to find a continuation on that. And even if it falls a little into the soothsaying category of filmmaking, where Edgar Wright's trying to predict rather than commentate, which he's kind of doing at the moment.
Yeah, that'd be great too.
I would appreciate the risk, because this is a risk in itself, in that it is a very metaphorical film, and a lot of the readings of it is just on how basically simple the way it's been told allows you to read it. But if you are a straightforward blockbuster watcher, you might just love action and you can get away with it, but you'll also be somewhat disappointed, I imagine, in little bits and pieces like the romance, which are very somewhat outdated and don't work past a metaphorical level, because they're maybe too simple. Even though that works for readings of the film, it might not work for the film, the in-narrative.
Oh, yeah.
So what I would love to see is another metaphorical film someday in the future that Wright takes again.
Yeah.
Very much similar concepts. Maybe, obviously different focus. Maybe not action film, for example. Maybe not a heist film. Hopefully, God no. And to see what he can really make of that and how that comment. I mean, heist in itself is a great idea when you're thinking about your reading of it. It's all a heist. The robbing of a generational's concept of what they are. I mean, that's fucking brilliant.
There you go. It was funny because, I caught myself thinking of Midnight in Paris while I was watching it as well. The idea of being out of your... Well, the idea that you believe that you're out of context.
Right.
That you believe in that you are meant to be in a different generation. Obviously Woody Allen's playing on something like most people are like, I don't feel like I'm part of my generation. I would have been more in the 70s. But that's always been a romantic notion. And look at the romantic aspect of the music that's been chosen as well.
Yeah.
You're bringing forward a lot of these snippets of a past time where you could claim that there is a little bit more innocence, but the way that Baby actually listens to the tracks also is in a very innocent manner because it reminds him of his mother, right?
Yeah.
There's those tapes that he makes, and he makes those beats with old beats, but he's remixing them according to how he understands music as well,
absolutely.
right? And so I thought that was kind of a fun way of looking at it. You know, the idea that he's taking the past and making of it what he will.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's not necessarily carrying all the implications of that past.
Yeah, that's the appropriation of the memories then, isn't it? So that's exactly it. He's taking on what is from generations before and trying to make sense of it in his own context. That's exactly a perfect reading of what you're talking about.
There you go. And so one last thing to close out what I was talking about. Obviously, this is a small take. And I mean, I could have worked on it a lot more.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's food for thought.
Absolutely.
I know that there are plenty of holes, and I might be reaching in certain places. But I mean, we wouldn't be Atlantic Screen Connection if we weren't doing that. But one thing that came to mind as well is the first time I saw Baby, I noticed this jacket, and I was like, "Oh fuck, that's amazing! This is a reference to Han Solo.
Yeah.
It can't not be."
Absolutely.
And so I thought it would be interesting for like Han Solo becoming a beacon for the millennial generation or Generation Z. You know,
the Millennial Falcon, for example.
There you go. And the thing is that the Screen fucking junkies have a show called the Millennial Falcon now.
Damn it.
And that's it. I mean, look at Solo. He fell in love. He did it on his own terms. He became a leader because he broke protocol. He didn't follow rules. And you're like, well, there you go. That's exactly what he's doing.
Died
he's basically,
as a poor father. Sometimes you want to fix the world, you have to be a bad dad.
But I thought it was cool that would have been the kind of if I mean, Wright is clearly playing to his Star Wars sensibilities.
Absolutely.
I'm sure he's a Star Wars fan. But that's it. I think that having Solo there, you know, and be like, look, we have a guy that could clearly be identified as a Han Solo type, a guy that basically knows how to navigate, you know, with a Subaru Impreza. The same way that Solo could be able to navigate an asteroid field.
I'll just say that
Empire Strikes Back.
Millennials always remember that it's it was the older generations, the money grubbers at Disney that killed your Han Solo. now you must make him your martyr.
There you go. But anyway, so that was my take on Baby Driver. Obviously, there's so much more to it than that. I mean, but I'll let you get your take on it, and then after that we'll go into general impressions, whether we did recommend it, but I mean performances.
Yeah, absolutely, all that kind of stuff.
Take it away, sir. What did you come up with? I mean, you were talking to me, and a lot of what you were talking about is the music. You talked to me a lot about the soundtrack, and you were reading about the soundtrack, not about the soundtrack, but about music in general, in films and how they play into a very well-crafted soundtrack. So take it away, sir. I want to hear that.
I mean, it's something that is going to seem half-baked, I imagine. At least in my head, it seems half-baked, because I was looking at this like wave of information on this book I'm going to talk about a little, and taking in as much as I possibly could. But I only found out about it maybe 2-3 days before we were due to record the episode. So I tried to piece together what I was trying to get across when I originally went looking for the book. And I found a lot of great things there that helped support what I was getting at. But I know there's just so much more, and I cannot do it justice. But I'm going to be pointing everyone in the direction of the book, because I know I'm going to be reading it some more, and I recommend you read it. But first, let us just talk generally. So...
Cool.
The obvious buzzword that came to my mind when thinking about Baby Driver was kinesis, which is this kinetic energy plays a huge role in what Wright tries to do in general with his films. He's become quite notable for his like smash cut or transitions. That's just one of the many elements that he implements in his filmmaking, but it's probably the one that's gathering the most traction in the mindset of people trying to piece together what exactly makes an Edgar Wright film, Edgar Wright's films. But that has a lot to do with kinetic energy. And in Baby Driver, both in presentation and potential desired outcomes, I wanted to quickly posit some thoughts on kinetic energy and summarize why I think, from a filmmaking standpoint, this is just a fine crafted action movie. And I think the word's right there, action. As the genre, Wright took the concept as literally as possible here, built a protagonist to theme the concept around, and then worked from there. So I'm just going to look at a lot of examples for a moment about why kinetic energy is such a big part of this film. And if I can think of all the decisions made to introduce some kinetic energy into the film, we got to start with the central premise. Just getaway driver. Cars, the primary function of cars is to take us from one place to another. It's just that simple. It's all about motion from the very ground up. And then we think of Baby's general characteristics, excluding music, because I'll get to it in a bit, but he's soft-spoken, he's generally silent, and he wears sunglasses, and here we're seeing Wright setting himself a challenge. create a character who speaks more through on-screen movement than actual dialogue. And that's not to say dialogue doesn't count as kinesis either, but the actual idea that action plays more than words is very much a part of this. And that the character can't even work with eye movement to carry his thoughts across, or glances or knowing looks. That's a very small part of you get a couple in the film every now and then, but for the most part, he's in sunglasses, holding his own. And we could look at that again, obviously, as a part of his alter ego as well. But, because the readings reinterpret themselves over and over again. But this is the kind of way I want to put it. And also looking at how Baby then gets himself across to other characters. He dances, he beats his thumbs off surfaces to the music, he headbangs, he mimes piano, he knocks tables, he parkours, he plays his own music, and he uses sign language to communicate with his adoptive father. Also, he reads lips. They never say that, but he definitely reads lips.
Oh, yeah.
There's decisions in the mise-en-scène, which, for those not super up with their film terminology, is just generally visual storytelling in essence. It is a vague notion, but it's kind of a great undefined.
It's blocking and framing.
Blocking and framing is the best way to get it across. But essentially anything that plays into the story or the narrative, for the most part, via visual medium, usually count as mise-en-scène. But yeah, people debate it all the time.
Yeah, it's where you place the characters on screen and how you decide to shoot that. That's going to convey something to the viewer.
Absolutely, and also just even objects in rooms and the setting of a room in general, or the angle you look at a room in general. The piles of ways to think about mise-en-scène. So yeah, and the decisions there. Think of how motion sneaks into every scene. The washing machines at the laundry store, which translates to that record imagery, obviously is one of the more showier ones, but we can also think about how the traffic passes outside the diner window in the couple of times that we're there, and how the gates open for the prison. We're getting a movement there, even just in small scenes where we already have motion with people walking, but they're very simple, broken down, and there's some kinetic energy on screen that we can read into on its own many times, but if we just look at the general emphasis that keeps going throughout the film, we know that motion is there consistently on some level. Plus, we have little actions that keep small scenes going. Baby's phone, which buzzes across the diner table. We've got the whiteboard for setting up plans, so we've got a constant movement with Kevin Spacey. Even in what is usually the most boring scene of any heist movie is the planning scene, so...
Yeah.
They introduces a very clever motion tactic there. Flowing transitions between the testifiers keeps a standard court moving. That again drags the films to a halt every single time, but we fade in and out of different testimonies, which is great. And anywhere else the camera moves with the scene, unless it doesn't have to show drama unfold. Like the long hold of Bat's gun on Baby, or Buddy leaning in the window. These are obviously used for dramatic effect. There's still an action in place. There's definitely a significance on the hold, though. Mm-hmm. And it's always after an action, so the lean, then a pause. The point, then a pause.
Even at the end of the film when they arrest him, even the distance between the characters when Baby's in the middle of the street and he says, "Don't do anything."
Yeah.
The camera actually stands still, but there was a chase before that. So yeah, you're absolutely on.
Great. So many decisions to keep motion on screen, and when it comes to off screen, of course we have his music. Now we're here. Now we're caught back up to what that was foreshadowing. Music itself is vibration in the air, so it is kinetic. And here I want to introduce my main source of reading. This is the point that I want to talk about the book, The Musicality of Narrative Film, by Daniela Kulizik-Wilson, who is a lecturer at the University of Cork. And this book, I was so happy to find it. I just overwhelmed because I was just looking for something. I was really more looking for essays, and then I found this proper book. And when I read a sample of it on Google Books, I was just like, yes, this is definitely what I'm looking for. And since then, it goes way beyond Baby Driver, way beyond. But I want to take it to Baby Driver now for a moment, and then maybe eventually I'll probably keep working this in at some point because I really am enjoying it that much. So yeah, in her book, Kulizik-Wilson explores the concept of the shared features between music and film, such as rhythm, spatial relationships, structural similarities, and composition. That, with the introduction of sound to cinema, she tries to understand the complementary nature music and film share by the reliance on the other's missing elements, at least in relation to narrative film. And I've got a quote: "Music and film can be viewed as partners in a relationship that can be explored in both analogous as well as interactive terms. Essentially, the work spins out of how we often describe film in terms of having music-like qualities, how features sing on screen, how elements flow like a song, how events build to a crescendo. The underlying metaphor suggesting the two forms share traits and giving examples of how films explore those relations to present impactful and moving cinema."
Right.
Back to music in Baby Driver. While Wright does work this in on a diegetic level, in that the music does exist within the confines of the story, which is what diegetic means. It's just like narrative.
Yeah, within the main narrative.
Yeah, it works in cooperation with the non-diegetic elements, i.e. the elements that exist outside the story, like Wright's camera work and visual storytelling. So think of the emotional effects that are trying to be obtained by the inclusion of certain songs. The film opens with Bell Bottoms by the John Spencer Blues Explosion, and we get some of the location fed to us visually in time with these punctured blasts. Meanwhile, there's this building staccato violin building in the background. The sense we're supposed to be left with here is tension at a reveal. The audience is made to feel that something is going to happen because the build in the music is going to lead to a crescendo or a dismount. What happens is a car pulls into frame, and we pull up to see our cast just as the music moves into its main verse, this longer series of call and answer guitar play with the blasters still there,
right,
but are met with a higher guitar and plucky violins to suggest the tension is easing or to create this sense of cool after a short burst of tension. There are other scenes as well, I'll keep them shorter. Think Hocus Pocus by Focus. That was fun to say. And how it plays into I believe, the parkour chase. There's this intense series of drum rolls, then this weird chanting. It's all very chaotic, and it builds in a falsetto until it capsizes in drums and guitar. This mad double kick pedal working as well. It's supposed to be frantic, and it works in time with the steps of Baby as he runs away. So we both see his effort and feel the tension as the two work in sync. Other examples are Brighton Rock and its heavy chorus, the relaxed, dreamlike feel of B.A.B.Y. by Carla Thomas, and even, I think, in a quieter scene, probably the one that Baby leaves his adoptive father at a care home, and it's not in the soundtrack, but the music is New Orleans Instrumental No. 1 by R.E.M. And it's got this serene string section and a simple keyboard melody. And if it didn't make you emotional, it still works in tandem with the images on screen and how it attempts to evoke the mood of goodbye, even as there's mounting chaos in the background. And we'll go for another quote. "The effect of juxtaposing musical stasis with visual kinesis also resonates with Eisenstein's often expressed belief, embodied in his idea of audio-visual counterpart, that the basic precondition for realizing a synthesis which involves different artistic media is for each component to express what the other cannot. One could argue that by combining musical stasis and visual kinesis, the described autonomous musical material, which is not necessarily experienced as tense, becomes such when fused with the picture, creating a charge between the static and the dynamic. It also means that the effective power of this scene does not depend on the synchronization of the movement of music and the movement generated by elements of the visual composition, as Eisenstein suggests in other segments of this analysis, but rather lies in the merging of their independent attributes. So we get the sense that the soundtrack fills in for what the images alone cannot represent.
So you're talking about balance.
Balance and complementary nature. So it's not always balanced because...
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, I mean, okay, yeah, so that's why at one point the music will become background music as opposed to... It won't be necessarily leading the scene. And in other sequences, and the narrative itself is going to become informed what actually the music is doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And what's great about that is, and while there is plenty of kinetic energy going on in the goodbye scene with the helicopters and searchlights moving throughout the shots, as well as the father's sign language, kinesis does not equate emotional payoff alone, and so the oral elements all play a part. That's also not to dismiss the fact that sound is more than just the music, and the book goes through this with an understanding of something called mise en bande.
Okay.
This is a quote. "The ethos of the musical approach to film is in a way also mirrored in the theoretical/analytical concept of mise en bande, which was presented by Altman, Jones, and Tatro as the acoustical equivalent to mise en scène. Just this image analysis benefited from introduction of the comparative and relational notion of mise en scène or putting onto the stage, so understanding the soundtrack requires the concept of mise en bande, or putting onto the soundtrack. So at one point, we can even see Wright potentially commenting on his awareness of this viewpoint through Baby's music making. Little more than a series of instruments, mixing, percussive sounds, and a recording of dialogue blend together this work to create Baby's original track, Was He Slow? Something that then actually takes shape beyond the soundtrack and enters the diegetic viewpoint of the story once Bats and Buddy get their hands on it. So using this, we can see that Wright is aware of the importance of this element in storytelling and even adapts it further into the story. But what does all the kinesis on and off screen ultimately try to tell us? Well, we know a number of reasons why he wanted to do this, but now we just need to try and understand what outcome he was hoping for. And I've got 3 roughly pieced together in my mind, but this is really more of an open question to you, the audience, anybody. Because I certainly don't have all the answers. I didn't finish the book yet. So first, we can see it as a commentary of the genre. Action movies should have action. How does one employ the strengths of the genre to aid in the storytelling? Ensuring action exists in all frames from start to finish. Epitomized by Baby's tinnitus. Even silence is not an option for the action movie. Something must always be in motion, even if it is as low as a hum. Here, Wright sets a standard of how all the aspects of filmmaking can be united together in various mixes and blends with the tropes of a genre to further the genre itself.
Nice.
Secondly, the blockbuster factor. Baby Driver is not especially complex as far as stories go. In fact, its leanings on a simple moral of be a good guy even when doing bad and the world will be fair, compounded by a happy ending and a saccharine classical romance, makes for straightforward viewing. But what the use of popular music post-1950s and some dance and rock tells us is that this is beyond the standards for films of an actual movie score. This is no halfway house. This is a firm decision. The action blockbuster is for pop consumption, and thus should be backed by pop music rather than classical elements. The inclusion of instrumentals in genre blends like Beach Boys and Bell Bottoms does suggest that he is aware that pop music comes in various shapes and sizes, and that a good story contains more than a single element if it wants to be less genre theater and more accessible. But his decision here to fill the soundtrack end to end with 5-minute songs like a still running iPod is an acceptance that this story is supposed to be simple and fun, rather than complex and difficult to comprehend. Lastly, emotional connection. The book, and I don't have the quote here of the relevant French impressionist, but it goes on to discuss the idea that there is nothing in correlation between the timing of cuts of footage and emotional payoff. That something, usually sound, but also movement, were required to elicit an emotional response from the audience. Through the inclusion of oral and visual kinesis on every frame, though, Wright is here trying to get his audience to empathize with Baby and company. If we look at the basic narrative, there's no character who doesn't earn our sympathy on some level. Baby and Deborah, both stuck in the grasp of others. Buddy and Darling, lovers who we are left to assume escape the setup in much the same way Baby and Deborah intend to, though either by force or choice end up back in crime. Bats, who may actually have mental problems. Doc, who ultimately redeems himself as a father figure and a romantic.
Yep.
And Joseph, a deaf caretaker now in need of care. Characters who aren't always what they appear and connect with each other often, plus ultimately a story of redemption for Baby. Here, Wright is trying to tie the bow around the package in order to keep us invested, both through the stimulus of physical energy and how that relates to ourselves. See the following quote. Rhythm is a truly ubiquitous phenomenon that permeates all manifestations of life in the universe. Biological rhythms govern all the processes in our body, from continuous pulse of the beating heart and the rhythm of breathing to the body's responses to external cyclical rhythms of nature manifested in the succession of day and night, lunar influences, the change of the seasons, and so on. We are drawn to the rhythm of the film as it's something we have in common with it. And so, I mean, we could go further, and we're already bringing up 1,000,001 different ways to read this film. You could even go the same way with kinesis and the way that the film is put together in the same sense as a music video, as we've already discussed, is put together. You could analyze that from a kinetic point of view, and how that played such a point in that music set the standard for how those videos and the tempo and the rhythm played into exactly how those videos ended up coming to be. But I would like to reread the book about 6 more times before I come up with any more stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, you clearly are onto something. I mean, if we just look at what you're talking about in terms of kinesis with regards to music videos, look at the I won't say that I'm 100% sure on this, but look at the Jason Bourne trailer.
Right, sure.
When it came out, it was one of the first trailers that I noticed that they would actually use the music and the cocking of the guns at the same time to create a rhythm.
Right, yes, cool.
And so that's been a pattern that we've seen throughout many action film trailers where you're going to have the musical score. Even just look at Kong Skull Island. They actually use that same thing, you know, the cocking of the gun in order to create more noise that's actually in sync with the beat. And so you're constantly playing with the soundtrack in order to create you're having it kind of bleed into the narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. It synchronizes with the narrative on some level to reinforce a significant part of what it's trying to get across.
Yeah, and I mean, it does definitely call attention to it because I mean, most of the time when you're listening to a score or a theme or something like that, it's there to help what's on screen. Yeah. It's not supposed to distract you from it. And when I've noticed, I mean, when I'm watching trailers, that little part distracts me. I'm like, oh, they're actually using it as the beat. Ha ha ha.
Yeah.
You know? Mm-hmm. And so I'm actually taken out of the film just a little bit. A lot of trailers have been using that kinesis in order to, you know, chide people into going to see the films to show that if there's action, the music is actually taking part in the trailer, as opposed to just being something that hovers there where you're like, oh, at least there's music.
Think of like Suicide Squad, you know, where the rise of the actual pre-courses causes the screen to cut to black and another shot to come up. You know, it sets a rhythm to be matched.
Yeah,
and that
there you go.
In turn gets across this idea that, you know, Suicide Squad's a film that is dramatic but fun, you know, and intense.
Rhythm is clearly the word that I was looking for. I mean, that's exactly what it is. The rhythm of the trailer itself is cause to get you to move as well, and basically it's moved to the theater. And so I think that they're doing a good job now by editing trailers to be a little bit more rhythmic in order to get you to actually be pumped about it, but you don't know why. And one of the main things that I noticed is when we're playing the trailers throughout the episodes, that's when I started picking up on it a little bit more. I was like, oh, look at that. They're actually using that. I mean, and I actually I was a little bit more involved in the trailer from an audio perspective because you can't see the images. So I'm like, it's actually still enticing. So it was fun to notice that I was actually maybe interested in seeing a film, even though I couldn't see what was actually being portrayed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's some of the great stuff we can look at, how Wright is commenting on the use of rhythm in films, use of kinesis. It's just that there are so many ways to be creative about it. I think if you want a general takeaway when it comes to filmmaking, you can absolutely choose to read this as a fight back against the quick cut editing action scenes of, say, the last Bourne movie. You know, where we can't really keep track of what's going on. And it's far more about how we can also creatively move from one thing to another, keep track of the action, but also involve all the elements that film has to offer as a form rather than just some of it, you know. What good does a bunch of, like, an orchestra do for Bourne that a pop song wouldn't, you know? It's, depending on the song, of course. I'm not just saying, you know, you could put ABBA over it and it's going to work, but it would be entertaining. But, you know...
Definitely.
Pop music is certainly... It has a bad reputation when it comes to film, specifically because it comes from the MTV generation and how it was used to boost the profile of pop comedies of the time. You know, the 80s are just full of dance sequences and fun, poppy movies with not that many morals or interesting characters. But they could get away with it because they had they had the soundtrack of the summer in them, you know. And Baby Driver posits that, yes, it can have a soundtrack of the summer, but it can have a good film that uses the soundtrack in a diegetic way and actually utilize what film has in its tool shed, you know?
I have to be honest. I mean, I haven't seen a soundtrack used this well. This is this year for me that I was like, holy shit, this is really great. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 used their soundtrack
on a narrative
perfection.
level, exactly the same kind of idea. Maybe in a different direction, but same idea, definitely.
But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Baby Driver might actually be the millennial generation's Pulp Fiction.
That's...
And I think that this film is as much as it's flawed, the same way as Pulp Fiction can be, even if like you're looking at nonlinear narrative. Baby Driver isn't necessarily taking cues from a nonlinear narrative, but in terms of like what I was talking about, like a coming of age story in reverse, Edgar Wright is really reshaping specific tropes and adapting them to a generation of kids that need a new model in order to make films, use music in films, and just something to look up to as a refresher, like a reset button, if you will. And that's what I remember walking out of the movie theater and saying, yeah, we're 23 years past Pulp Fiction. It was time for something like this to happen.
Right.
And I'm very, very happy to have been around to see it, where this is our reset button, in my opinion anyway. In terms of where we are, it's like I said, a bookmark film. Pulp Fiction is very much a bookmark film.
Absolutely.
Baby Driver is that new one. This is going to be this generation's Pulp Fiction, and I hope this generation is going to love movies as much as I've loved movies. The kids that I talk to in school aren't necessarily that much into film. They're more into TV series now because there's a little bit more to follow. Yeah. There's a little bit more development. And I can understand that. It's easier to easily accessible. They don't have to leave home. They can binge watch it on Netflix and whatnot. Absolutely. And it's a lot cheaper to get $10 a month on Netflix than it is to go out and spend, so a lot of cinema chains are going to have to get their act together if they want to have this surviving business.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if Baby Driver is one of those flags, a symbol of change, if you will, then perhaps the next generation of kids that are going to slowly be getting into films, like I was 14 when Pulp Fiction came out. If someone is 14 years old right now or 15 years old and he sees Baby Driver, he might be one of those guys that decides to go to the movies a little bit more often if he gets to see movies like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's a great way to see it. Hopefully, it pans out the same way that we imagine this resurgence of blockbuster independent cinema like Baby Driver is, where it is a big studio film made by an auteur, very much like Pulp Fiction was. There's some sort of shared idealism there. Hopefully that crossing of paths does point in the direction of something a lot more promising when it comes to the bigger studios embracing the smaller or more considered artists, especially not just in name, actually giving them their say and not just like Josh tranking them.
Yeah, and they've destroyed careers, that's for sure. But there are other people that have destroyed their own careers. Troy Duffy comes to mind with Boondock Saints, where you're like, dude bit off a little bit more than he could chew, even if he had a big fucking mouth. He made a really good movie, but he should have shut the fuck up too. But anyway, I think Trank, he made a couple of mistakes, but at the same time, Wright fought back in a good way, and I think it didn't necessarily bite him in the ass too hard because he had public sympathy with him after what happened with Marvel. And I'm pretty positive that Lord and Miller are going to have the same kind of feedback when it comes to their next movie after being fired from the Han Solo project.
Oof, absolutely.
We'll see.
Hopefully
we'll
so.
See. I don't know. I don't consider Wright to be a prima donna. I've heard Lord and Miller talk, and they are a little. So we'll see. We'll see how that pans out. Anyway, moving on, just quickly before we have to close this out. Performances, overall thoughts in a more general basis.
You said Han Solo earlier. Literally kept thinking it every time I saw his face from that angle when he was talking to Deborah. We kind of see him under there, and we get his little chin and his kind of pointed nose that's kind of crooked to one side, and his big puffy cheeks. Absolutely. And it's just like, you look like a young Harrison Ford. You look like a dead ringer Ford. You're kind of, are you a good actor? ? That I always have of Harrison Ford. I got the same thing for him.
Oh, no, Harrison Ford depends, man.
Yeah,
he's a movie star more than anything else. But occasionally you'll be like, oh, I like that. Because, I'm one of the few people that actually enjoys the remake of Sabrina.
Right.
And he plays Linus in that film, and he's fucking great. He's such a bastard, but he's a lovable bastard. So yeah, there's that. He's stellar in The Fugitive as well, I can't take anything away from that. But there are other movies that you're like, okay, whatever. They could have put anybody else in there and it would have probably been better.
Yeah, definitely as a blockbuster movie action star, he's nearly unparalleled. And there's traces of that in a young there's traces of that in a young Ansel Elgort, which is always great to see because I do really like Harrison Ford's kind of hands-off acting approach. And there's very much a similar trace here. That it wasn't, you don't look at it and go like, that's acting super class, but you do think, God, that guy could lead a film. And that's all that mattered. And so I'm very happy with that. Otherwise, performance, I love John Hamm. can't we just have all the John Hamm in
Isn't
the world?
he fucking awesome in the movie?
He
is fucking great.
He was like, I really... It hurts my heart to think about how he became the villain, because they share that one scene together where they're bonding over Brighton Rock.
Yeah, they're bonding over music. It's great.
This is just a bad set of circumstances that tore apart some really fucking cool guys getting it together. You know, like it was really disappointing. But Jesus Christ, the man can act. You know, and this he was given all the material he needed to play
He can act with the right director.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think we've
true.
seen this. This is a flash of genius in this one for me, because I've seen Hamm in other films, and I wasn't particularly impressed. I was like, oh, he's just Don Draper someplace else. This was out of character for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I thought, finally, we get to see that this guy actually does have acting chops. I 100% agree with you on John Hamm.
Regarding the women in the film, I do feel a little bad about their roles. The metaphorical readings works a lot, and they do the best they can with the stuff they're given, I think. But the downplaying of the female characters to mostly plot devices, it does irk me at times. I mean, I think it works for the romance narrative. I think it works on that sort of reading. But when I think about just playing the narrative straight and trying to comprehend in this 21st century film why Lily James's character just totally and utterly buys that change, it doesn't work on every level, is what I mean. And I'm not saying it has to, but I think one of that it should work on is the straightforward blockbuster, and you shouldn't have to question why she jumps on board other than your pre-existing knowledge of that's how romances work. I
get it, but I mean, you gotta give Wright credit for her not being a damsel in distress. I think that she willingly got on board with this because she saw something of herself in him.
Sure.
You know, both being trapped in a certain way. Obviously, he wasn't talking about it much, so you can call me out on that. But I feel like there's a certain charm to their relationship that's like, maybe, a little bit, how can I put it, juvenile in the love at first sight aspect. However, she does put herself in harm's way. She doesn't necessarily wait for him to take her away or something like that. She is working, she's making a living, she's doing her things, and I thought that was great. And Ilsa's character, I forgot her character's name.
Darling.
I thought she was great because if you look carefully throughout the entire portion that she's alive, she's the one calling the shots.
Oh, absolutely.
John Hamm basically goes wherever and he's just like, he disrespected me. What? And he goes after it. Like, basically John Hamm's character is a trained dog throughout the entire film. And then once she's gone, he's let off his leash, which is why he goes insane. And so I thought that it was kind of cool for them to be in positions of control of their own destiny, if you will. And these are the choices that...
I would argue then that, yes, that's true, but they both work in service of male characters. You know, they don't exist beyond the reach of the narrative for themselves. There's no woman in the narrative who does that. Not in the way that there's a Bats, not in the way that there's a Doc, not in the way that there's a baby, who, yes, is tied to Deborah in a big way, but also has his own story and his own consequences that you can take totally separately from her. You can't do the same for Deborah, and you can't do the same for Darling. It all has the implications of what they do to and for men.
Okay, then maybe Wright is commenting on that situation through what you were talking about in terms of the use of music when they're actually exchanging. And he says, oh, hey, you know that song, Deborah, from this band? What was the band?
T-Rex.
Do you remember?
T-Rex.
T-Rex, yeah, there is that. And so essentially what he's saying is like, there is a narrative for you. It's just not expounded in the way, and she says, yeah, but every song's about you, baby. I think Wright might actually be pointing out the fact that there is an unfairness that comes with regards to women and men.
No, I do like that. I'm as I'm saying, I'm not saying it's a total loss, because the two characters, they do get some decent screen time. They and as you said, especially with Darling, she does play a major role. You're right again, the damsel in distress thing. There is this point near the sort of finale in which Lily James is the one trying to make the decision to just keep going. There's a strength of her character that definitely isn't defined by Baby. But I would say that the narrative continually finds roadblocks to give Baby an advantage over her. And in one case, in that her following him isn't justified strongly enough on a straightforward narrative basis to really be considered beyond a metaphorical understanding of how these things work. I find that it irks me every now and then when I read the story back to myself, and also the idea of how it works on a blockbuster standpoint just for general audiences. There's a point where homage and referencing previous material can still negatively affect audience members just for the basis that it is something that is being done before. And if the commentary isn't loud enough, you're not really seeing it, then you're just walking away with an example of a film that gives us malnourished female characters, tries to make a point of it, and we would have to scrap at the understanding, but it's nowhere near as loud as you're hearing all the other messages. You know, the fact that it's a footnote on this episode should pretty much give you that exact reasoning,
Yeah, definitely. And we haven't talked about the man himself, Kevin Spacey, in the film. And at first, when I was watching the film, I was like, there's Kevin Spacey.
Being Kevin Spacey.
Being Kevin Spacey. But when he starts writing on the board and he starts detailing his plan, I was like, there's Doc. I couldn't believe that I actually saw him I was like, oh, fuck it. He's actually acting. Yeah. I could actually tell his character at this point, because when you're watching Kevin Spacey, I mean, he was in a movie called 21 with the dude from across the universe. And I was like, oh, you're just Kevin Spacey now. It sucks. And then he pulled out Frank Underwood, and I was like, there's Frank Underwood. I love that. And to see him be able to break the image of Frank Underwood and go into Baby Driver and just be Doc, I was like, fucking hell, this is amazing. I'm very happy to see a guy that's just not winging it anymore. He could clearly phone it in, and everybody would be like, really, Kevin Spacey's in the movie, which is what my parents were like, oh, we like Kevin Spacey, we'll go see that. But I actually saw him put on a performance that was actually good. I was like, oh, good, he's actually a character.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, one of the few decisions I really liked. I like that the mentor, as bad as he's implied, does get a redemption arc that really does work with the story, and I'm very happy about that. I also like that the adoptive father isn't killed for some poor payoff, poor dramatic.
What a beautiful story that was.
Yeah,
that relationship is very
touching.
Brilliant. I'm sorry I didn't bring it up before.
Yeah.
Very beautiful relationship.
Yeah, exactly, and it doesn't overstay its welcome, but it definitely has its point in the story in regards to Baby and their relationship. It's really touching, and I'm glad it wasn't used some bullshit. That he could have died off screen. He could have been shot down just to amp up the tension of the drama. None of that happened, and I'm just so pleased how it worked out, because that's a lazy decision waiting to happen.
Definitely, I 100% agree. And I mean, I think that if we go according to the what I had talked about a little bit in terms of trauma, you could say that even him, as someone who's mute, has been through so much that he's now rendered speechless. He can't communicate using words to really explain how he's suffering inside. And Baby, he can say, just don't do these things. Don't go into crime. Don't do that.
No answers,
it would be a
just
crime
general
for you
advice.
to actually do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, when he comes home and he puts on the music and he can feel it on the, he's like, oh, this is a great track. I can understand it when he's playing the Baby track on the speakers. That's such a wonderful relationship. And so I think that, killing him off would have been, like you said, a very lazy thing to do, because that character's clearly been through enough in his life.
Absolutely.
And he needs a break, and that break comes in the form of Baby actually giving him a little bit of like I'm taking care of you. It's my turn to take care of you, right?
Yeah.
Jamie Foxx was in another movie sometimes. I think he was a fun character. He seemed unhinged, but at no point in the movie did I not see Jamie Foxx.
Yeah, I agree. I guess when I think about it, I hadn't seen Jamie Foxx actually play this character before, and maybe he has in his career. But I can't think of it. I can think of a number of people that he might be egging, like Denzel Washington-esque characters.
Right.
I could see that sort of element of it. I can't actually. I can think of some unhinged Jamie Foxx characters like Django, but I can't think of this character. So I guess this is new ground. At the same time, it felt so familiar that it was distracting. And that's weird, because this film is full of familiarity as a notion. And yet, this was the one that I was kind of like, it's maybe it's just because it wasn't as entertaining beat for beat as it should have been on paper. Jamie Foxx plays Nutcase. I guess my imagination went places the film refused.
Possible. I mean, to me, he seemed to be playing the same character he was playing in Horrible Bosses. And so...
Well, the idea of that character from Horrible Bosses and how he thinks of himself, I get you, yeah, but...
But I mean, I didn't like him particularly in Amazing Spider-Man 2, but, I mean,
if I look at performance like in Collateral, he was phenomenal in Collateral.
Oh, yeah.
I thought his vulnerability really seeped through the screen, and I was like, this is a great guy. So I don't know what happened. I don't know if Jamie Foxx was just like, yeah, this is what crazy looks like. And like, maybe you should dial it up just a little bit. Maybe dial it down from Amazing Spider-Man 2, but dial it up from what you did in Horrible Bosses.
Yeah, I would say it was maybe a little more dramatic than the film required for the role. It should have been a little more lighter, just in general, whereas it was played shockingly straight, and that kind of jarred with me a little, because there's always a bit of whimsy in each of the other characters, including John Bernthals.
There you go. That's a perfect way to say it.
He plays it just unhinged enough, but it's kind of funny just how bad he is. But he's still a threat that we never get to see paid off. But he's quirky.
I just feel like sometimes maybe he was reading the lines a little bit too deadpan when he could have gone up or down at certain places. But that's just me.
No, I agree.
That's it. So, and Lily James, I thought she was great. Her smile is infectious. She's such a beautiful girl. I mean, you see her smile and you're like, come here. she's such a darling. I think that I want to see her in more movies.
I think her performance definitely embodies hope, much like the character is supposed to be hope for Baby. Yeah. So she hits that chord perfectly. And the only thing I'd ever seen her in, I know she's on British TV quite a lot, but she was in Cinderella as Cinderella in the remake, and she's a phenomenal Cinderella. But it's not a role that has a lot of meat to it. She brings a lot to it for what it is, and you see her potential in romantic roles. I maybe would have liked to have seen a little more aggression from her character, but I can't fault her for that.
Right.
I think I would have liked to see her play a more active part in the action. She does at the end a little bit, but not a lot. Mostly kind of sidestepping decisions more than actually taking arms. And I would have liked to have seen her go there, because I know I have this feeling that she's going to be fucking incredible once that role comes along.
Right.
But yeah, as this sort of sweet decision maker, she sold me entirely on this interest.
Cool. So that pretty much does it for me. I mean, is this a movie you would recommend?
Oh, yeah. This is just something that is going to keep getting better analysis as time goes on. And let's keep going. As you said, it's as a bookmark film is a great way to put it, because it is definitely going to be this year. It's definitely going to be this point in time. We're going to check back on it every couple of years. If we're still doing the show, we're definitely going to be like, where are we with Baby Driver now? We can definitely throw a little word in here or there, because we're always just going to be at the back of my mind. That was a point where things need to be continually read so that, we have better understanding of where we are and how films reflect the society we're in and how films are made in general and where that goes. There's so many balls to juggle here, and Baby Driver is right in the center of them. We just have to figure out which hand to juggle it with next.
Very cool. And I agree. I agree with you 100%. This is a film that I do recommend, although when I was on Nerd, I explained that to me it was very much a cinephiles film. My parents and Leslie enjoyed the film, but at the same time, they felt that there was something missing. And that something missing is the fact that, like I was saying, it plays a little bit surreal, and it's not necessarily the type their cup of tea, if you will. But for me, this is candy, and I'm glad sometimes that now I'm getting old, so I can't have candy too often. But I'll take this one. This is one that I want to keep for myself. So it's really good. I'm happy to see Edgar Wright in great shape.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
This is just, I hope he can continue from here. This is a great film, and I'm hoping that it keeps making money, because this will only bode well for future installments. People will be like, okay, look, we gave him a little bit of leeway. He did a lot with it.
Baby Driver 2.
Don't do Baby Driver 2.
Learn nothing from this decision and make Baby Driver 2. I fucking dare you.
Yeah, I'm not the petition type, but maybe I'll sign that one. Don't do Baby Driver 2. Yeah. Or you know what? Do it in 20 years.
Yeah,
the same way as Tarantino might be gearing up for Kill Bill 3.
There's always that thing about romantic novels that, you don't see the recourse it has on everyone around the main characters.
Exactly.
Selfish bastards. I agree.
All right. So, anyway, shall we close this out, sir?
Let's do it, man.
All right. So, thank you very much for tuning in to Season 3, Episode 1. We hope you guys enjoyed our little take on Baby Driver. Throughout the entire summer, people have been constantly sending us more feedback, and I want to give a big shout out to Alejandra. She's at sick_66 on Twitter.
Yes.
Lexi Miranda as well. Fook This, which is Sarah.
Sergey.
Jane. David Hart as well. I've had
really fun exchanges with them. There's another one called Melissa. I don't know what their Twitter handle is. But they have these PJ Party massacres now, which is really hilarious.
It's fucking hilarious.
It is really great. And so they've been a really fun group to follow. So follow them. As I said before, David Hart, even Sheila now, who's changed her name to Giggles Galore, which is hilarious. Just a big shout out to them. Big shout out to the guys at In Session. We haven't forgotten you guys. We're busy doing other shit as well.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for your support still. And that's about it. Lee.
Yes, you can follow me at Big Pic Reviews on Twitter, and you can see my website, bigpicturereviews.co.uk. We have loads of stuff planned for Big Picture Reviews in the near future, and it's always constantly growing and getting more involved, and we're still using it as a spot to continually teach ourselves to write reviews. So if you want to see that in progress, some of us are getting really good at it. So there's that. Otherwise, on Twitter, you can follow me. I'll be posting stuff. I've got more screenwriting shit to be doing in the next month, and you can keep on top with me on that. And by following me on Twitter, you're invited to the exclusive club of people who need to tag me in things for me to read them. So absolutely do that. I would love to read whatever you're pandering these days. It's the only way I ever see anything. I usually share it with other people just for the sheer value in that you kind soul tweeted me of all people. So do that. I look forward to reading your stuff. Let's create a dialogue. Why not?
Cool. My name is Jason Michael. You can find me at AtlanticSC on Twitter. Be sure to like our Facebook page. We've gotten a couple of new people following that. That's great. We've gotten great news as well. I mentioned it, so you guys want to seek that out. Go visit the Facebook page to get our updates on the awesome news. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be attending the Fantasia Film Festival this coming weekend. And I'm hoping to get you guys a little bit of reviews on what I was talking about in that post. So go be sure to read up on that. So that's it for us this week. I want to thank you guys again for tuning in. Don't forget to give Lee a follow at Big Pic Reviews and myself at AtlanticSC. Obviously, if you're listening to this, you found the podcast. So I don't necessarily need to tell you guys that we're on iTunes or Google or Stitcher Radio, although I just did. But yeah, so big shout out to all of you that are tuning in right now. And that's it for us. We're going to see you guys next time. We'll decide what movie it is. You guys will know soon enough. Take care. Bye.
This conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.